I'm sure you're wondering why bacterial cells don't have nuclei, while plants and animal cells do. This is because bacteria only reproduce asexually, so don't need to utilize a nuclei the way a plant or animal cell does, as they primarily reproduce sexually. You'll learn a bit more about this later. The obvious reason as to why there are similarities between all three types of cell is because animal cells and plant cells evolved from bacterial cells, where the differences are due to specialization. Notable examples of this include the flagella on the bacterial cell, which allows the bacteria to move around. Animal and plant cells form tissues and organs, so don't need to move around themselves, and bacteria don't form tissues and organs, but instead just exist in huge masses of lone bacterial cells. The chloroplasts in plant cells are obviously for photosynthesis. Plant and animal cells are actually very similar, with the main difference being that plant cells have chloroplasts and permanent vacuoles, where animal cells don't, since animals don't photosynthesize. Other than that, they share all components. Cells specialize when certain genes in the nucleus are activated. What exactly causes the cells to specialize is unknown, but logical guesses would include changing based on the environment and the body they're in. For example, the generic cells may specialize into sperm cells in colder regions of the body, which is why male testicles have evolved to hang outside the body, and unfortunately in harm's way. Similarly, fat cells may develop where space is particularly plentiful, such as your tummy, which is why the cells expand, because they are given the chance to. Do you see the parallels between evolution and cell differentiation? At the end of the day, all life, from cells to animals, came from simple cell-like organisms, hence the parallels. Fat cells are specialized to expand and hence take up space so that they can insulate and cover more area. This is also why they need very little energy and have a small cytoplasm, because they don't really do much except just lie there. Fat cells just need to insulate and that's it, so they don't do much else. I can go on for ages, but what is important is that you realize how adapted each specialization is. Diffusion occurs when there is a high concentration of a substance somewhere and a lower one elsewhere. In the higher concentration, the molecules are bumping into each other and repelling each other due to the outer electron shells, so will naturally get displaced where there is space for them. Hence diffusion. The bigger the difference in concentration, the faster the rate of diffusion, since the molecules are bumping into each other more often and they get displaced more easily. The difference is called a concentration gradient. A higher concentration difference over a smaller distance leads to a steeper gradient as the molecules are more packed together and space is more in demand, and space is also available more nearby, so the molecules will spread out much faster. Smoke is a great example of diffusion. You see smoke rising, but you often see smoke forming a wide cloud which is larger than the fire itself in volume. This is because smoke diffuses in the air. The presence of membranes in different parts of your body can make diffusion more selective, since the holes in membranes are different sizes to prevent larger molecules from entering. For example, the large intestine primarily absorbs water instead of food, which generally are larger and more complex molecules than water, such as glucose. The membrane in the large intestine will let small water molecules in but not large food ones. This is also why small intestines deal with food and larger intestines deal with water. Small intestines only need to handle broken down, smaller food molecules, whilst the larger intestine needs to process and absorb water, which is even more important to the body than food, given the body is almost purely waste, so needs more water at once. As you know by now, photosynthesis is the opposite of respiration. If respiration releases energy and is exothermic, then photosynthesis must absorb it and require it, making it endothermic. Where does this energy come from? That's right. Light. This is why plants rely on sunlight to photosynthesize. I'm sure you're aware of the starch test, but basically, the plants that haven't been exposed to light will not have produced starch as it didn't produce glucose as it didn't photosynthesize. The result of this is that the iodine applied won't turn blue as there is no starch. This demonstrates the importance of energy in chemical reactions in addition to substances. Although you are taught that photosynthesis will level off with carbon dioxide, if the carbon dioxide was increased to ridiculously high levels and there is no oxygen for the planet to respire with, it will still die. It is important to know that the primary purpose of respiration is to produce energy. The primary purpose of photosynthesis is to produce glucose, which can then be used in respiration to produce energy. You may be wondering what the point of photosynthesis is if it uses up energy. Although photosynthesis requires energy instead of releasing it, the plant doesn't use its own energy to photosynthesize. Instead, it uses sunlight. Plants can't directly convert sunlight to useful energy, so they do it through photosynthesis and then respiration. This is why plants die without light. Since without it, they would have to use up their own energy to produce glucose, which cancels out the energy produced by respiration. The energy produced by respiration is used for every bodily process, from moving muscles, to digesting food, to just about anything. It is also important to understand that respiration is not breathing. Breathing is transporting gases in and out of the lungs, so respiration can take place. More specifically, transporting oxygen in, and getting rid of waste carbon dioxide and water vapor. Respiration happens in every single cell. Anaerobic respiration happens when the oxygen reserves in the cells gets used up and glucose is broken down without oxygen. This happens in intense exercise. This causes lactic acid to build up, where more energy is used to break it down than move muscles, but the increased anaerobic respiration needed to provide that energy just results in more lactic acid buildup, which means you can't move your muscles the way you could before you exercised so heavily, and instead of shrugging it off, you get more tired. Before I start on mitosis, allow me to explain DNA briefly. DNA is an amino acid, where the A at the end stands for acid. For any amino acid, its structure is determined by the length of the strand and the sequence or pattern of bases. There are 4 bases: A, G, C and T. A and T always only pair up with each other, and same for G and C. A base cannot pair with itself. In a cell, there are free-floating bases which are produced by the cell using the energy from respiration and from the protein ingested from the organism. Protein is made of hydrogen, carbon, oxygen and nitrogen. Plants don't exactly eat protein, but use glucose and nitrogen, which they absorb from soil in the form of nitrates. Herbivores get their protein from eating plants. Anyway, the DNA strand unzips itself and attaches to the free bases to create copies which are completely identical to the original, since any given base will only ever pair up with a specific other one. There are now 2 identical strands of DNA. The new cells then produce the free-floating bases and are ready to reproduce the process at will. Specifically, in the nucleus, the DNA is found in a ribbon-like structure called a chromosome, which is a long coil of the DNA. Before mitosis occurs, the chromosome unravels itself into the long DNA strand you just saw so it can pair up again. A chromosome is a long tied-up strand of DNA, which unwinds itself before mitosis. Meiosis is a little different and only occurs in sex cells, which are egg cells and sperm cells. Humans have 46 chromosomes which exist in 23 pairs. Each chromosome pair is responsible for a different body function, e.g. one for eyes, one for skin, etc. In meiosis, the chromosome breaks at half-length, and gets divided into cells which contain 23 single chromosomes. When the cell meets with the opposite sex cell which contains another single 23 chromosomes, they both pair up to form the full 46 chromosomes, where half is from the mother and half is from the father.